So when you hear the word globalization, what comes to mind? Probably container ships, the internet, modern stuff, right? Well, what if I told you the real story is way, way older? Let's uncover the secret history of our interconnected world, a story that started centuries before any of us were even here. And believe it or not, our whole journey starts with a super simple question. What on earth does a simple potato have to do with, the rise and fall of empires, mass migration, and literally life and death for millions of people? It just looks like a vegetable, right? But its story is the key that unlocks everything about our global past. Because when things with this potato went wrong, they went horribly wrong. What you're looking at here is from the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. A single crop disease came in and just wiped out the main food source for the poorest people in Ireland. It led to mass starvation, people fleeing the country, and this catastrophic dependence on one single crop, a crop that wasn't even from Europe to begin with, that's a huge clue in our story. Okay, so here's the big takeaway. The making of our global world isn't some recent news story. It's this ancient, epic tale, and it's woven together from all these different threads. Trade, people moving around looking for a better life, money flowing across borders, and yeah, even the spread of germs and diseases. This stuff has been going on for thousands of years. All right, so let's jump back in time. Our story really kicks off with the world's first great connector, the Silk Roads. And I want you to forget the idea of just like simple roads. Think of it more like a massive, complex web, almost like the nervous system of the ancient world, just pulsing with life, both on land and across the seas. And what's so cool about this image is the life it shows you. I mean, this is a painting from the 8th century. It shows us that these routes were just bustling with activity. They were literally knitting together huge parts of Asia and connecting them all the way to Europe and North Africa. And this was happening long, long before the Christian era. And they were carrying so much more than just silk. You had Chinese pottery and Indian spices heading west. And then, going the other way, you had precious metals, gold and silver, flowing from Europe into Asia. But the really amazing part? The cargo wasn't just stuff you could hold. Ideas, religions like Buddhism, early Christianity, Islam, they all traveled these same routes. And yep, even invisible travelers like germs. It just goes to show you, trade and culture have always been connected. Okay, so if those ancient routes were like the first internet, the 1500s, that's when the world really started to feel smaller. This is when European sailors found new sea routes to Asia, and in the process, they just kind of stumbled upon the Americas. And suddenly, global connection went into overdrive. The consequences were huge, and as we'll see, often incredibly brutal. And this led to one of the biggest game changers in all of human history, what we call the Great Food Swap. I mean, think about this. Before the 1500s, foods that we eat all the time today, potatoes, tomatoes, corn, chili peppers, they were totally unknown in Europe and Asia. No way. But after Columbus's voyages, these crops from the Americas started spreading everywhere, and they completely transformed what people ate. For the poor in Europe, just getting the humble potato meant they could eat better and actually live longer. But this new era of connection had a really, really dark side. So when the Spanish conquistadors showed up in the Americas, they had steel swords, they had guns, they had armor. But what do you think their single deadliest weapon really was? It wasn't their swords. Nope. It wasn't their guns. Not even close. It was germs. Invisible killers, especially smallpox, that the Europeans brought with them. See, the Americas had been cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years, so the people living there had zero immunity. The disease just tore through communities like wildfire, wiping out millions. And this quote from a colonial governor at the time is just chilling. It shows you the horrifying thinking back then. He basically saw the plague as a gift from God, clearing the land for them to take. So let's fast forward to the 1800s. Now things get even more connected, and it all morphs into a brand new kind of global economy. You can think of this time as the Great Global Reshuffle, just this massive, massive movement of people, goods, and money on a scale nobody had ever seen before. Economists break it down into 3 key flows, like 3 powerful currents that were changing everything. First, you've got the flow of trade, goods like cloth and wheat crossing the oceans. Second is the flow of labor. That's people moving for work. And third, the flow of capital, which is just a fancy way of saying money being invested over huge distances. And the thing is, these 3 flows weren't separate. They were all interconnected, feeding off each other and completely reshaping the world. Okay, here's a perfect example of how this all worked. So Britain gets rid of these things called the Corn Laws, which basically protected their own farmers from cheap food coming in from other countries. The second they do that, bam, cheaper food floods into Britain from places like America and Australia. So what happens next? Well, British farming pretty much collapses because they just can't compete. And that means thousands upon thousands of people are suddenly out of a job. And this one single political decision made in London sets off this huge wave of migration. People had to move to the cities or even leave the country altogether just to find work and survive. And the sheer scale of this movement is it's mind-boggling. We're talking about an estimated 150 million people. That's how many people left their homes in the 19th century, crossing oceans, crossing continents, most of them just looking for a better life. But, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, we have to be crystal clear here. This flow of labor wasn't always a choice, not by a long shot. It also includes the brutal, forced migration of enslaved people. This image here, from an auction in New Orleans. It's a powerful and horrible reminder that this new global economy was built just as much on hope as it was on horrific exploitation. Millions of people were captured in Africa and forced to work on plantations, growing things like cotton and sugar for markets back in Europe. So after all that, what does this history lesson mean for us right now? Well, the truth is we are living with this inheritance every single day. The world we know, the one we live in, is the direct result of all these centuries of connection, of conflict, and of exchange. So if we're going to boil it all down, here are the key things to remember. First, our global world wasn't built overnight. It has incredibly deep roots. Those ancient trade routes, they were moving ideas and culture just as much as they were moving goods. And we see this paradox of connection, right? The very same forces that brought us new foods and helped people live longer also unleashed devastating diseases and led to awful exploitation. And finally, as that story about the Corn Laws shows us, one economic decision in one country can set off a chain reaction that changes lives all over the globe. You know, this long, complicated story of globalization, it's not over. It's still being written. In fact, we are living in the next chapter, right now. And that really leaves us with one final, big question to think about. Now that we know how we got here, what's our chapter of the story going to look like?